Karen Whitmore emerged from her backyard pool like a suburban sea monster, chlorinated water cascading off her designer swimsuit as she hurled herself toward the fence line. Behind her, two uniformed HOA enforcement officers stood dripping wet on her pristine deck, their clipboards soggy and their authority thoroughly soaked. "That's assault with a deadly weapon," Officer Martinez sputtered, wringing pool water from his polyester shirt. "Water is a weapon. It's my pool," Karen shrieked, her perfectly styled blonde hair now plastered to her skull. "My property, my rules." The confrontation had started innocently enough. Karen had been enjoying her morning swim, a daily ritual she'd maintained for the 3 years since moving to Willowbrook Estates, when she spotted the officers approaching with their measuring tape and citation books. She'd watched from the shallow end as they documented her unauthorized pool float, a swan-shaped inflatable that exceeded the HOA's newly implemented flotation device size restrictions, her non-compliant pool furniture, chairs that were apparently 2 inches too close to the property line, and her excessive pool chemical odor, the smell of coloring that every pool owner in America recognized. When Officer Martinez had the audacity to test her pool's pH levels without permission, Karen had snapped. The 38-year-old real estate agent, who'd spent her career perfecting the art of polite aggression, abandoned all pretense of civility. She'd cannonballed directly into the deep end and emerged with the fury of a woman who'd reached her breaking point. "You can't just splash HOA officials," Officer Jenkins added, his badge now sporting a water spot. "There are procedures, protocols." Karen's neighbor, Mrs. Chen, peered over the fence with unconcealed glee. For months, she'd watched Karen terrorize the neighborhood with her own HOA complaints, reporting grass that grew a quarter-inch too tall, demanding removal of unsightly garden gnomes, and measuring the exact distance between mailboxes with a ruler. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. "Karen," Officer Martinez said, attempting to regain his composure, "you're in violation of 17 different HOA regulations. We're here to help you come into compliance." "Help?" Karen laughed, a sound that bordered on hysteria. "You people have made my life a living hell for 6 months. New rules every week, fines for things that weren't even problems before. And now you want to tell me how to use my own pool." The officers exchanged glances. They'd dealt with difficult residents before, but Karen Whitmore was in a league of her own. She'd attended every HOA meeting for the past year, armed with Robert's Rules of Order and a color-coded binder full of complaints about her neighbors. But somewhere along the way, the HOA had turned its attention to her property, and the hunter had become the hunted. "Ma'am, if you'll just calm down and let us explain." "Explain this." Karen grabbed the pool skimmer and sent another wave of water cascading over the fence. The Willowbrook Estates Community Center had never seen anything like it. Karen had called the emergency HOA meeting for 7 p.m. on a Thursday, and by 6:45, every chair was filled and people were standing along the walls. Word had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. The pool lady had documents, and she was ready to talk. Karen stood at the front of the room, her hands steady on the podium, despite her racing heart. She'd spent the past 3 days preparing, organizing evidence, and making phone calls. They sat in the front row, their lawyer beside him with a briefcase full of legal documents. Jake Morrison sat 3 rows back, his face pale but determined. "Ladies and gentlemen," Karen began, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "6 months ago, I would have been the person telling you to sit down and stop asking questions. I would have been the one defending the HOA board and demanding that you follow the rules, no matter how ridiculous they seemed." She paused, looking out at the faces in the crowd. Mrs. Chen was there, along with the Johnsons, the Pattersons, and dozens of other neighbors she'd reported, fined, or antagonized over the past year. "I was wrong, and I'm here tonight to tell you exactly how wrong I was." Karen clicked to the first slide of her presentation. It was a photo of her own violation notice, the one that had led to the pool incident. "This is what started my investigation. A $50 fine for a pool float that was 2 inches too large. But it wasn't really about the pool float, was it?" She clicked to the next slide, Jake's documents, with names and addresses redacted, but the implications clear. It was about this: a systematic plan to drive homeowners out of their properties so that Pinnacle Property Management's parent company could acquire prime real estate at below-market prices. The room erupted in angry murmurs. Karen held up her hand for silence. "I know what you're thinking. Karen Whitmore, the woman who reported my mailbox color, is now claiming to be on our side. And you're right to be skeptical. I've been terrible to most of you. I've been petty, controlling, and self-righteous. But I've also been played." She clicked to the next slide, her own violation history, showing how she'd gone from enforcer to target in a matter of weeks. "They used my obsession with rules and regulations to identify which homeowners would be most vulnerable to their scheme. Every complaint I filed, every neighbor I reported, every meeting where I demanded stricter enforcement, I was helping them build a database of targets." Tom from 3 houses down stood up. "Karen, what are you saying? That the HOA board is in on this?" Karen looked at the 3 board members sitting in the front row. President Morrison, no relation to Jake, looked like he'd seen a ghost. Secretary Williams was frantically typing on her phone. Treasurer Johnson was staring at the floor. "I'm saying that some members of the HOA board may have been misled about the true purpose of the new enforcement policies. But the evidence suggests that at least one board member was fully aware of Pinnacle's plans." She clicked to the final slide, an email chain between Treasurer Johnson and Pinnacle's regional manager, discussing accelerated timeline for property acquisition and maintaining plausible deniability. 20 minutes later, Karen sat in her kitchen, wrapped in a terry cloth robe, staring at the official citation that had been slapped onto her sliding glass door. Her phone buzzed incessantly, with notifications from the neighborhood Facebook group, where someone had already posted a video of her aquatic assault. "Karen Whitmore loses it at pool," read the caption, accompanied by crying laughing emojis and fire symbols. The video had already been shared 37 times. Her husband Dave wouldn't be home from his business trip until Friday, leaving her to face this mess alone. She tried calling him twice, but both times had gone straight to voicemail. What was she supposed to say anyway? "Hi honey, I just assaulted 2 HOA officers with pool water, and now I'm probably going to be featured on the neighborhood's social media hall of shame forever." Karen's phone rang. The caller ID showed her mother's name. "Karen Marie Whitmore, what in God's name have you done?" Her mother's voice crackled through the speaker before Karen could even say hello. "How did you? Your cousin Jenny sent me the video. You're on Facebook, honey. The whole world can see you acting like a lunatic." Karen closed her eyes. "Mom, you don't understand. They've been harassing me for months. Every single day, there's some new rule, some new fine, some new way they want to control how I live in my own home." "So you decided to throw pool water at them like a child having a tantrum." "I didn't throw it. I splashed. There's a difference." "Karen, listen to me very carefully. You need to apologize. Right now, before this gets worse." But Karen was already scrolling through the comments on the video. Most were laughing at her expense, but a few caught her attention. "Hell are Karens getting their own medicine," wrote one user. "About time someone stood up to these power-hungry bullies," wrote another. Power-hungry bullies. The phrase hit her like a slap. Is that what she'd become? She thought about Mrs. Chen's garden gnomes, about the young couple on Maple Street whose American flag she'd reported for being improperly displayed, about the elderly man whose mailbox she'd measured with a ruler because it looked suspiciously close to the sidewalk. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from her real estate partner, Miranda. "Saw the video. Clients are asking questions. We need to talk." Karen's stomach dropped. Her career was built on reputation, on being the reliable professional agent who knew every regulation and every rule. She was the HOA president's go-to person for enforcement, the neighbor who kept property values high by maintaining standards. Now she was the neighborhood laughingstock who'd had a public meltdown in her backyard. She opened her laptop and pulled up the HOA's official website. The violation notice was already posted in the community alerts section, along with a statement about appropriate behavior during official inspections. Her name was right there, bold and black, for everyone to see. But as she scrolled through the recent violations, a pattern emerged. In the past 6 months, the HOA had issued citations for increasingly ridiculous infractions. Pool floats, garden hose placement, the exact shade of beige approved for mailbox posts, bird feeders that were too attractive to wildlife. Someone had even been fined for hanging laundry outside because it was visible from the street. Karen realized something that made her blood run cold. She hadn't just been enforcing the rules, she'd been helping create this monster. Every petty complaint she'd filed, every neighbor she'd reported, every meeting where she'd demanded stricter enforcement had led to this moment. The HOA had turned her into their perfect weapon, and then they'd turned that weapon on her. Karen spent the next 2 days in detective mode, armed with coffee, determination, and a growing sense of righteous indignation. She'd barely slept, instead poring over HOA meeting minutes, violation records, and financial statements that she'd never bothered to examine closely before. What she discovered made her stomach turn. The HOA's enforcement contract with Pinnacle Property Management had been quietly amended 6 months ago. Instead of receiving a flat fee for their services, Pinnacle now earned a percentage of every fine collected. The more violations they found, the more money they made. It explained everything: the sudden increase in enforcement, the ridiculous new rules, the way officers seemed to appear out of nowhere with measuring tapes and citation books. Karen's kitchen table looked like a war room. She printed out every violation issued in the past year and organized them by type, frequency, and target. The pattern was undeniable. They'd started with the usual suspects: overgrown lawns, trash cans left out too long, cars parked in driveways instead of garages. But once those easy targets were exhausted, they'd moved on to increasingly petty infractions: pool floats, garden domes, flag positions, mailbox colors. Her phone rang. It was her neighbor Tom from 3 houses down. "Karen, I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but I saw what happened with the pool thing. I wanted to let you know. They got me too." "What do you mean?" "Violation notice yesterday. My dog's water bowl on the porch is apparently a non-approved outdoor fixture. They want me to move it inside or pay a $50 fine." Karen's jaw dropped. "Tom, that's insane. Your dog has been drinking from that bowl for 4 years." "I know, but here's the thing. I started asking around after I saw your video. Half the neighborhood has gotten citations in the past month. Mrs. Patterson got fined because her roses grew too close to the sidewalk. The Johnsons got hit because their kid's bicycle was improperly stored in their own driveway." Karen felt something shift in her chest. "Tom, can you do me a favor? Can you ask around and see who else has gotten violations? I want to know exactly how many people they're targeting." "Already ahead of you. I'm making a list." After hanging up, Karen stared at her reflection in the black computer screen. For the first time in months, she didn't see the HOA's enforcement angel. She saw a woman who'd been played, manipulated, and ultimately discarded when she was no longer useful. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Saw the pool video. You're not alone. Meet me at Starbucks on Main Street at 2 p.m. if you want to know what's really going on." Karen's hands trembled as she typed back, "Who is this?" The response came immediately. Someone who used to work for Pinnacle. Someone who knows where the bodies are buried. Karen looked at the clock. It was 1:30 p.m. She grabbed her keys and headed for the door, her mind racing. The pool incident had been humiliating, but it had also been a wake-up call. For the first time in her life, she was on the receiving end of the system she'd helped create. And she was about to find out just how deep the rabbit hole went. At Starbucks, she spotted him immediately. A young man in his 20s, nervously fidgeting with his coffee cup. He stood up when he saw her approach. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Jake Morrison. I used to be an enforcement officer for Pinnacle." "Used to be. They fired me last week. Apparently, I wasn't issuing enough citations to meet their new quotas." Karen's blood ran cold. "Quotas?" Jake looked around nervously, then leaned forward. "Mrs. Whitmore, what I'm about to tell you could get us both in serious trouble. But after seeing that video of you in the pool, I realized someone needs to know the truth." He slid a manila envelope across the table. Everything you need to know about Operation Compliance is in there. Internal memos, email chains, financial projections. They've been planning this for months. Karen's hands shook as she opened the envelope. The first document was labeled Revenue Enhancement Strategy, Willowbrook Estates. The second was an email thread between Pinnacle Management and the HOA board. The third document made her drop her coffee cup. Johnson stood up abruptly. "This is slander. You can't prove any of this." "Actually," said a voice from the back of the room, "she can." Everyone turned to see a woman in a business suit walking down the center aisle. She was followed by two men with badges. "I'm Detective Maria Santos with the County Fraud Division. We've been investigating Pinnacle Property Management for several months, and Mrs. Whitmore's evidence has been instrumental in our case." The room fell silent. Karen felt her knees go weak with relief. "We have warrants for the arrest of 3 individuals involved in the scheme, including Mr. Johnson here. The investigation is ongoing, but I can tell you that no homeowner in this community will lose their property as a result of this fraud." As the detective read Johnson his rights, Karen looked out at her neighbors. Many of them were crying. Some were applauding. A few were looking at her with something she hadn't seen in months: respect. Mrs. Chen stood up. "Karen, I want to thank you. I know we've had our differences, but you did the right thing tonight." Karen felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Mrs. Chen, I owe you an apology. I owe all of you an apology. I let my need for control turn me into someone I don't recognize." "The question is," called out the young father from Maple Street, "what happens now? Do we still have an HOA? Do we still have rules?" Karen looked around the room at her neighbors, people she'd spent the past year treating as adversaries instead of allies. "I think," she said slowly, "we need to start over, all of us, together." 3 months later, Karen stood in her backyard, watching her neighbors' children play in her pool. The new HOA board had voted to eliminate most of the restrictive regulations, keeping only the basic rules needed to maintain property values and community safety. Her oversized swan float bobbed happily in the shallow end, right next to Mrs. Chen's dragon-shaped inflatable. The criminal trial was still pending, but Pinnacle had been barred from operating in the county, and the fraudulent fines had been refunded. Karen had been elected to the new HOA board, despite her protests that she was the last person who should be trusted with authority over her neighbors. "That's exactly why we need you," Tom had told her during the election. "You know what it's like to be on both sides of the fence." Karen's phone buzzed with a text from Jake Morrison, who'd found a new job with a legitimate property management company. "Saw the news about the convictions. Congratulations on taking down the bad guys." She texted back, "We all took them down. Thanks for having the courage to speak up." As she watched her neighbors enjoying their Friday evening, Karen reflected on the past few months. She'd lost her reputation as the neighborhood enforcer, but she'd gained something more valuable: the trust and friendship of people she'd once considered enemies. Dave emerged from the house with a pitcher of margaritas. "So," he said, settling into the chair beside her, "any regrets about becoming the pool lady?" Karen laughed, thinking about the viral video that had started it all. "Just one," she said. "I should have used the garden hose instead. Better aim." As the sun set over Willowbrook Estates, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching from the shadows. The criminal case was closed, but Pinnacle's parent company remained a mystery. Detective Santos had mentioned that they were part of a larger investigation, one that spanned multiple states and involved dozens of communities. Karen's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Congratulations on your victory. But this is just the beginning. They're already planning their next move. A friend." Karen stared at the message, her peaceful evening suddenly clouded with unease. She'd won this battle, but the war might be far from over. And next time, she might not be fighting for just her neighborhood. She might be fighting for neighborhoods across the country. The pool lights flickered on automatically as darkness fell, casting dancing shadows across the water. Karen watched the reflections and wondered what other secrets might be lurking beneath the surface of America's suburbia. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Detective Santos. Karen, we need to talk. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. There's something else you need to know. Karen sighed and reached for her margarita. Being the neighborhood hero was apparently a full-time job. Karen's coffee spread across the Starbucks table as she stared at the document in her hands. It was an email from Pinnacle's regional manager to the HOA board, dated just 2 weeks ago. Phase 3 of Operation Compliance is exceeding projections. Target residents have been identified and are responding as expected. Recommend accelerating timeline for Phase 4, property acquisition, while resistance remains minimal. Property acquisition, the words hit Karen like a physical blow. Jake, she whispered, what is Phase 4? Jake's face was grim. They're not just collecting fines, Mrs. Whitmore. They're building a case to foreclose on properties for non-compliance. Look at page 12. Karen flipped through the papers with trembling fingers. Page 12 was a spreadsheet titled Acquisition Targets. Her address was third on the list. They've been systematically targeting homeowners they want to remove, Jake continued. Your property, the Chen's place, the corner lot where the Johnsons live, they're all prime real estate that Pinnacle's parent company wants to redevelop. Karen's mind raced. But they can't just take our homes. We pay our mortgages. We follow the rules. They've been creating new rules specifically designed to be impossible to follow, Jake interrupted. Pool float restrictions that change weekly, mailbox regulations that contradict each other, landscaping requirements that violate city ordinances. They're setting you up to fail. The revelation hit Karen like a sledgehammer. Every petty complaint she'd filed, every neighbor she'd reported, every meeting where she'd demanded stricter enforcement, she'd been helping them identify targets. They turned her into their unwitting accomplice, using her obsession with rules and regulations to map out exactly who would be most vulnerable to their scheme. How many people know about this? Karen asked. Just me, and whoever's at the top of Pinnacle's food chain. The HOA board members think they're just making the neighborhood more exclusive. Karen's phone rang. It was her husband, Dave, finally calling back. Karen, I just got back from my trip and saw 17 missed calls from you. What's going on? Dave, I need you to come home, right now, and call our lawyer. Our lawyer? Karen, what happened? Did something go wrong with the pool incident? Karen looked at Jake, who nodded encouragingly. Dave, the pool incident was the least of our problems. I think they're trying to steal our house. There was a long pause. Karen, are you feeling okay? You sound. I'm fine. I'm more than fine. For the first time in months, I can see clearly. She stood up, gathering the documents. Jake, I need to ask you something. Are you willing to testify about what you know? Jake hesitated. Mrs. Whitmore, I signed a non-disclosure agreement. If I break it, they'll sue me for everything I have. And if you don't break it, they'll steal half the neighborhood. How many families are we talking about here? Jake consulted his phone. Based on the violations issued in the past 6 months, maybe 30 families are at risk. Karen felt the familiar surge of righteous anger, but this time it wasn't directed at neighbors who left their trash cans out too long. This was the real thing, the kind of anger that had built this country, the kind that had sparked revolutions and toppled corrupt systems. Jake, I spent the last year being their perfect little enforcer. I've made my neighbors' lives miserable, and I've helped them identify targets for their scheme. I owe it to every person I've wronged to make this right. She pulled out her phone and started typing. I'm calling an emergency HOA meeting. It's time everyone knew what's really going on. Jake's eyes widened. Mrs. Whitmore, if you do this, there's no going back. They'll come after you with everything they have. Karen thought about the video of her splashing the officers, about the neighbors who'd laughed at her humiliation, about the years she'd spent enforcing rules she'd never questioned. She thought about Mrs. Chen's garden gnomes and the young couple's American flag and the elderly man's mailbox. Good, she said, her voice steady for the first time in weeks. Let them come. I've got a pool, and I know how to use it.